Boundary lines can be blurry, but nothing warps reality quite like a neighbor convinced she owns land that isn't hers, especially when she's willing to fight over a driveway she never paid for. Let me start from beginning. From the first moment the cones appeared, the neighborhood felt different. Not changed in a loud or dramatic way, but in the low-level, simmering tension that grows when someone decides the rules no longer apply to them. The cones were bright orange, plastic, and cheap, yet they carried an air of undeserved authority, lined up right across the edge of a driveway that had belonged to the same house for over 20 years. The homeowner had noticed little things from the first week the new neighbor moved in. A lingering stare, an overlong pause whenever he checked the mail, an unmistakable air of entitlement that seemed to hover like humidity. But nothing had prepared him for the morning when he walked outside and found half his driveway suddenly reserved. The cones formed a crooked, plastic fence marking a border that didn't exist. Behind them stood the neighbor, Karen, as the community had already begun to call her, hands folded across her chest, chin lifted as if she were presenting a royal decree. She had, in her mind, decided that a strip of his driveway was hers. Not shared. Hers. Her reasoning, as she would later explain at least 6 times to various people, was rooted in a belief that the previous owner never needed that part, so she assumed it was open for use. She claimed the concrete looked like it naturally flowed toward her property, despite the fact that it had the exact same texture and color as the rest of the homeowner's driveway. She insisted that an imaginary boundary line ran diagonally across his property, granting her the right to park her car, and apparently anything else she felt like, on that section of concrete. Over the next week, the cones multiplied. First 4, then 6, eventually 10, arranged with precision that suggested she spent far too much time thinking about someone else's driveway. Along with the cones came little handwritten notes taped to them, childish signs declaring that the space was private property and under dispute. Neighbors began to whisper, partly in amusement, partly in disbelief. Everyone knew this was nonsense. The homeowner's driveway had been the same size for decades. Nothing had changed but Karen's imagination. The situation escalated when she began dragging her trash cans onto the strip she claimed was hers, calling it her designated staging area. Her visitors parked there, blocking part of the homeowner's access. At one point, she even placed a large potted plant directly in the middle of the disputed space, as though establishing territory like a territorial bird marking a nesting site. As the days went on, the cones did more than physically obstruct the driveway. They became a symbol of defiance, a provocation meant to irritate and dominate. Every time the homeowner came home from work, he had to move them just to pull into his own property. Every morning he'd find them replaced. Karen watched from her window like a sentry, ready to re-establish her imaginary line the second he drove away. The situation grew even more absurd when she began telling other neighbors that the homeowner was trespassing on land that everyone knew was hers. She claimed to be researching old maps, though no one had ever seen her handle anything more official than a stack of gossip magazines. At a block gathering, she even announced grandly that she was in the process of filing a formal land dispute, though she had absolutely no legal basis for anything she was saying. The homeowner tolerated it quietly at first, thinking perhaps she would grow bored of the game. But entitlement rarely retreats on its own. And when a neighbor's entitlement grows strong enough, it begins to thrive on conflict, feeding on the reactions it provokes. The turning point came one evening when the homeowner returned to find Karen had parked her car, not beside the cones, but directly across his driveway, perpendicular, blocking him entirely. She wasn't even home. She had simply decided that if she couldn't claim the driveway by her imaginary boundary lines, she would monopolize it through obstruction. That was the moment he knew it was time to escalate. Politeness had been mistaken for weakness, patience treated like surrender. The situation had shifted from irritating to intrusive, from inconvenient to legally questionable. It was no longer a misunderstanding, if it ever had been. It was time to establish the truth with something Karen couldn't argue with, reinterpret, or scribble over with handwritten notes. It was time for a survey. And not just any survey, an official, stamped, notarized land survey that would show, beyond any doubt, exactly where the property lines lay, a document Karen would not be able to dispute, no matter how many cones she collected. As arrangements were made and appointments scheduled, the homeowner felt the first flicker of anticipation. There was something deeply satisfying about knowing the truth was about to surface, something undeniable and concrete. The cones wouldn't save her. The notes wouldn't save her. Her invented boundary wouldn't save her, and soon, the entire neighborhood would know it. The survey would change everything. The morning the surveyors arrived, the neighborhood felt unusually alert. Curtains twitched. Garage doors opened halfway, then stopped, as if the homeowners were pretending to be busy while covertly watching the scene unfold. Even the joggers slowed to a suspiciously gentle pace, clearly more interested in drama than cardio. The homeowner greeted the survey team with a sense of quiet relief. Their presence, official, calm, and methodical, felt like the first real step toward regaining control of his own property. They moved with practiced efficiency, unloading their equipment and marking key positions with small flags. Everything they did carried the weight of legitimacy, the kind that could slice through entitlement like a hot knife through plastic cones. Across the street, Karen burst out her front door the moment she realized what was happening. She didn't approach them immediately. Instead, she hovered on her lawn, arms tightly crossed, shifting her weight like a storm cloud preparing to break. She watched every move the surveyors made with the intensity of someone guarding a treasure that didn't exist. 4 hours, the team mapped, measured, cross-checked, and documented every inch of the property line. Their precision was almost elegant, each measurement sharp and deliberate. They paid no attention to Karen's silent, simmering presence. No more than one would notice a squirrel chattering from a nearby tree. Eventually, the homeowner saw her break. She marched toward the surveyors with the outrage of someone who believed she carried authority simply because she felt she should. Though no words were spoken aloud in this narration, her frantic gestures made her intentions obvious. She waved her arms toward the driveway, pointed toward her home, jabbed a finger toward imaginary lines in the air. The surveyors responded minimally, professional but indifferent, calmly showing her documents she clearly didn't want to see, and as they worked, the truth slowly assembled itself before the neighborhood like a puzzle finally snapping into place. When the lead surveyor finished his work and handed the homeowner the final report, there was no suspense left, only confirmation. The driveway belonged entirely to the homeowner. Every inch, every fraction of a boundary line. The strip Karen had claimed was so far from her property line that her cones weren't even close. Her imaginary border was not only incorrect, it wasn't in the same universe as reality. For a moment, Karen seemed unable to process the information. Her shoulders stiffened, her stare went unfocused, and her face flushed with the deep, unmistakable frustration of someone whose narrative had been irreversibly shattered. Then came the meltdown. Though this narration contains no dialogue, the scene spoke loudly through her frantic pacing, her dramatic gestures, and the incredulous way she pointed at the survey report as if it were a personal attack. Her disbelief morphed into indignation, then into something more chaotic, a full spiral into denial. She stomped back and forth, snatched up her cones, then threw them down again. At one point, she even tried rearranging them in a new configuration, as though shifting plastic could shift the truth. Neighbors gathered in quiet clusters, watching from a polite distance they absolutely did not intend to maintain. The spectacle had become a neighborhood event, not maliciously, but inevitably. When someone attempts to rewrite reality and gets caught, people can't help but look. Karen's meltdown climaxed when she dragged her large potted plant toward the driveway again, as if reasserting dominance through landscaping. But when she reached the edge, her supposed border, she froze. The surveyor stake sat firmly in place, bright and irrefutable, cutting through her delusions with merciless clarity. The homeowner said nothing, but his presence alone seemed to irritate her further. She stormed back into her home, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the nearest window. For the next hour, the neighborhood fell into a strangely peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional thump from inside her house. But peace, unfortunately, was temporary. By the next morning, she had escalated in a new direction, not on the driveway this time, but through a barrage of complaints she filed with anyone who would listen. She contacted the HOA, even though this neighborhood didn't have one. She called the county office, insisting the survey was incorrect, even though she lacked any evidence or standing. She even attempted to contact the previous owner, claiming she had verbal agreements no one could verify because they had never existed. Each complaint was dismissed gently but firmly. There was nothing to dispute. The homeowner's survey was official, accurate, and notarized. Karen's claims held no weight. Still, she refused to surrender gracefully. The cones returned, not in the driveway this time, but lining her own lawn in what appeared to be an act of symbolic protest. She placed the potted plant next to her mailbox as though repositioning it might restore some semblance of control. Her actions became smaller, pettier, but no less dramatic. Despite her theatrics, something significant had shifted. The power she believed she had evaporated the moment the survey results were revealed. And though she wouldn't admit defeat, she understood it. Her behavior became less bold, more erratic, as if she was scrambling to reclaim status through whatever scraps of conflict she could manufacture. But the homeowner, armed with the truth and the full backing of official documentation, was no longer inclined to tolerate her antics. The petty revenge he planned wouldn't involve yelling, confrontation, or escalation. It wouldn't require pettiness for the sake of pettiness. It would simply use Karen's own obsession against her, quietly, legally, and with impeccable timing. The kind of revenge that doesn't break rules, only highlights the one she ignored, the kind that would leave no room for denial because entitlement could only survive when unchallenged, and the perfect opportunity to challenge it was fast approaching. The weeks following the survey's conclusion brought an uneasy calm to the neighborhood. The cones remained scattered across Karen's lawn like abandoned soldiers, and the potted plant beside her mailbox stood as a strange monument to her failed land grab. Though she had stopped directly interfering with the driveway, she continued to glare from her window whenever the homeowner pulled in, as though her resentment alone might rewrite the boundaries the survey had cemented. But the homeowner had not forgotten the chaos she caused, the blocked driveway, the endless obstructions, the false claims, the layer of tension she had draped over an otherwise peaceful street. He had no desire for dramatic confrontation. What he wanted was resolution, preferably the kind that unfolded slowly, quietly, and unmistakably. That opportunity arrived in the form of a neighborhood beautification initiative. Once a year, the city offered a program allowing homeowners to apply for improvements funded through a small municipal grant. Most used it for tree trimming, sidewalk repairs, or landscaping work. It was a simple program with simple requirements, but it came with one particularly important perk: the ability to request official city easement markers be installed along the edges of the property. Markers that would remain permanently, markers impossible to ignore, markers Karen would see every single day. The homeowner applied without hesitation. His request was straightforward: installation of boundary markers along both sides of the property, including the full length of the driveway. After reviewing the recent survey, the city approved the application faster than expected. Within 2 weeks, a team arrived with metal stakes, cement, small reflective posts, and the authority to place them exactly where the legal property lines lay. The morning the workers arrived, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath again. It wasn't quite the spectacle the survey had been, but curiosity lingered in the air like static. The workers moved efficiently, marking each point from the street to the back fence, ensuring perfect precision. Each bright post drove another nail into the coffin of Karen's imaginary boundary. Karen emerged from her home almost immediately. She stopped at the edge of her driveway, watching with wide, disbelieving eyes as each marker was installed. She paced in a tight loop on her lawn, occasionally craning her neck toward her door as though considering retreating, then stepping forward again, unable to stand still. The workers didn't acknowledge her. They simply followed the official measurements provided by the city and the surveyor, spacing each marker with unshakable accuracy. The final post, positioned near the edge of the driveway, drove home the truth in a way even the survey map couldn't. It stood tall, reflective, and undeniably on the homeowner's land. More importantly, it was positioned several feet away from where Karen had insisted her imaginary line ran. The visual contradiction struck with unmistakable force. Her face hardened. Her posture stiffened. And though no words passed between them, her expression conveyed the bitter realization that she would never again be able to pretend ownership of a single inch of that driveway. But the homeowner's petty revenge didn't end with structural markers. He signed up for something else as well, a modest but impactful upgrade. Solar-powered pathway lights, approved as part of the beautification plan, placed along the driveway's perimeter. The lights served 2 purposes: illumination and emphasis. When night fell, they formed a perfect glowing outline of the driveway, highlighting the boundary with gentle but irresistible clarity, and every light sat entirely within the homeowner's property. The first night the light switched on, Karen stood in her window like a ghost caught between denial and fury. The glowing boundary cast a soft curve of illumination across the driveway, forming a quiet, radiant reminder of the line she had pretended did not exist. The neighborhood noticed too. Several residents paused during evening walks, admiring the neat outline. Some even praised the homeowner's sense of style. But beneath the compliments lurked the shared understanding of what the lights represented. The homeowner maintained composure throughout the process, never acknowledging the revenge unfolding before her. He simply went about his days, parking freely, pulling into his driveway without obstruction, enjoying the absence of cones that once littered his property. Without engaging in arguments or petty disputes, He had restored order in a way that was both satisfying and undeniably civil. Karen's retaliation attempts faded quickly. For a few days, she rearranged the cones on her own lawn in increasingly bizarre patterns, but when it became clear no one cared, she abandoned the strategy. Her potted plant was moved farther from the street, then eventually disappeared altogether. She still watched from her window, but the confident glare she once wielded had deteriorated into a dull, resentful stare, the expression of someone who knew she had lost a battle she could never logically justify. Over time, her presence became less disruptive. The homeowner noticed she avoided the driveway entirely, as if contact with the boundary markers might burn. She stopped speaking to neighbors, stopped pretending authority, and retreated deeper into her house. The neighborhood gradually returned to its usual rhythm, free from her self-imposed tension. Weeks later, when the city mailed the official documentation confirming that the markers were now recorded on public record, the homeowner filed the certificate neatly among his property papers. Felt like closing the final chapter of an unnecessarily dramatic saga. The driveway was his again, not because it had ever been in doubt, but because the chaos surrounding it had finally settled under the weight of undeniable truth. The revenge hadn't required confrontation, cruelty, or escalation. It had simply leveraged accuracy, patience, and visibility. The markers weren't meant to humiliate, they were meant to clarify. The lights weren't installed to taunt, they were installed to illuminate. Yet together, they created the perfect reminder that property lines exist regardless of fantasy, and entitlement cannot redraw reality no matter how brightly it flares. In the quiet that followed, the homeowner realized something unexpected. The battle for the driveway had not only protected his property, it had strengthened the community. Neighbors communicated more, shared stories more freely, laughed about the ordeal once the tension lifted. The experience, bizarre as it had been, became a cautionary tale told with a mix of disbelief and amusement. As the nights passed and the driveway continued to glow softly across the concrete, it symbolized not conflict, but closure. Not pettiness, but precision. And Karen, hidden behind her closed curtains, was left with nothing except the memory of a fight she had never been equipped to win, and the boundary markers that would remind her of the truth every single day. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.